Hello, everyone. Welcome to the makeup session for web dev, Schulich Ignite. We'll give a few more minutes, 5 more minutes or so, give or take, and then we'll fully begin.
Usman, let's start. Let's start.
Okay, we'll be starting now. Let me just share screen. All right, so welcome to Schulich Ignite Scorch session one. We'll be learning about uh, essentially web development and all the components of it. In this session, we'll be covering over the HTML, basically the main framework of developing web pages at the base level, and the CSS, how we're able to stylize our web pages and adding different type of appealing aspects to it. And as well as examine the dev tools within the web browser of your choice. As you can see, you can find the slides at the Schulich Ignite website, and the files are located on the GitHub. That's also shown on the slides. You can click on the link and access them there. To begin the anatomy of the web page. So when you load a page, such as Google, the browser, what happens is that, like, what does your browser want to show you? What's the content going to be looking like? What happens when you do a search, and how does your browser get the information? Regarding getting the information, we'll be discussing about that in the later part of the sessions. What is a web page? A web page is just what you see on your screen, essentially. HTML defines the structure and content of the page, while the CSS basically describes the structure and contents aesthetic display, and the JavaScript or the JS component just helps with the dynamic behaviors that will occur on the page. Basics of HTML. So since we mentioned that the HTML is basically the structure and content of the web page, usually you see things such as images, text, like right here, you have this text, block of text here, and you have this image right here. Essentially, all of this stuff you can design in whatever manner you want through HTML and CSS. Looking at the HTML syntax, we can see that this is an H1 element, a header one element, and the image element, image is this element here. There's a start tag and an end tag. Usually it depends on how they're designed. Some have a open tag, again, a closing tag, some are self-contained tags. And then there's inner content that you can add in, such as the actual information that you need, and then the attributes, which are additional aspects you can add to each of these tags. Okay, first exercise, check on a web page that you want and then see if you can create it. You can open Visual Studio, VS Code, and create a new HTML file. And just try using different types of tags and anchors and paragraph tags and whatnot, and just see how you want to design it. Uh, to design such a thing, we have here an exemplar setup where should you want to test something or build the skeleton of the HTML document, you can type in exclamation mark. And then you have this pop up and emit abbreviation, which just builds the entire skeleton right here, as you can see. So yeah, right now just run through some pages. We can come back in 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, you can unmute and ask or type in the chat.
Hello.
Yeah, what's up? What's up? Are you?
So, like when we're editing on HTML, like to check our work, we just have to like open up the file every time.
Yes. But
Uh,
we're
in order, there is an extension that you can add onto your VS Code. It's called Live Server, which essentially allows you to run a local host version of your HTML code on your the chosen browser. That way, if you make any updates onto your web page, they'll be automatically updated on the web page itself.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
yeah. If you're lost, you can look at my screen.
Sure.
Hold on. You guys see?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want the extension, which essentially just you don't have to open it up every time. It's called live reload, live server or live reload.
Live Server.
Okay. Yes. and just go to the extension tab. It should be on your left side. I have mine just flipped. And then after you install it, you can go live. Like if you see the bottom corner right here, you can say go live and it will reload this page every single time. So if you go to sample dot, it has nothing because I have nothing so far. But if you do this, and let's say hello world. Oh, no, no, no. Let me try again. Yeah, okay, now it works. So every time you save, it will, like if I didn't save there, it doesn't reload. And you save, it's there. Yeah, do you have any other questions?
I'm just trying out what you did. Can I see your code again?
Yeah, sure. So you can do this just by doing a, what is it, exclamation mark. And there should be abbreviation. Like it's a snippet, it's called a snippet. And it should have that for you. Yeah, okay. I think we should move on. Guzman?
I agree.
Oh,
Uh, so for all those that were in the other breakout rooms, when you are using VS Code, what you can do is install a extension called Live Server by Ritwik Day. What it essentially allows you is to run your HTML code actively on a local host. That way, if you make any updates to your HTML file, you don't have to constantly reopen it. Rather, it'll automatically update on your selected browser. Um, Looking at the slides again, there's examples of base HTML components being implemented here. This person has
screen share, bro.
a,
Screen share.
uh,
Screen share.
as you can see here, you have the motivating example here of persons with their age, their grade, their hobbies, favorite website. Using simple HTML tags and attributes and elements, they were able to create a basic level HTML website, same as here. This one has an image incorporated, some text, and some other components related to it. Um, Looking at the tags, there are different type of HTML tags that each do different things. Such as in this case, we're looking at the header tag. So H1 to H6 essentially are different levels of heading, with H1 being the largest and H6 being the smallest heading tag. Looking at the paragraph tag is simply a P tag, which just allows you to write down your text in paragraph format. It shows here, this is a block of text, simple. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the H1 to H6 heading tags, H1 being the largest and H6 being the smallest. We have some attributes that can be implemented in the tags, which will allow different features to happen. If we look at this, the anchor tag here, it has this attribute href, which essentially allows the user to click on this link here and it'll redirect them to the Schulich Ignite website. There's different components that can be added into each of these tags, and each of them can have multiple attributes implemented to them, such as here we have an href attribute, but we also have a target attribute. In this case, target underscore blank essentially allows the user to click on a link and the link will open on a new tab, whereas the default underscore self will open the link on the same tab. So an example of this, looking here, we have implemented a header 1 example, which is this, a header 6 example, which is this, the smallest of them. We have a simple p tag here as well, and the anchor tag with the href attribute. If I click on this, it'll redirect us to the Schulich Ignite website. And I can go back and I'll go back to here again. Here, what we're doing is essentially nesting tags in one another. So inner content nesting. Here we implemented a header 1 tag and an anchor tag, which essentially allows us to give the text the header 1 style, but also making it into a link that we can click on and access the whatever website you choose it to be. In the case here, what we set it to was the Schulich Ignite website again. So a quick question on the top hat. What are the elements here and what are their attribute values?
Just 1 second. Wait, are you guys able to answer or no?
No.
Okay, got it. Okay, now you should be able to. Okay, time is up. The answer is it on the other second page? Excuse me.
The second page is the next question.
Okay. The answer, if you see on the top hat, is A. So the element here would be the div and the h1 header and the anchor. The attributes would be the value and the Google link and underscore blank.
All right, the next question. What will show up when you run or have this code essentially. Sultan, you have your hand risen up. Do you have any question?
Yeah, I'll ask after the question, okay?
Oh, okay.
Okay, time is up. The answer is A and E, which is H1 size hello world, where the hello is also an anchor tag with the Google link. And wait, sorry. But it would not be B because um yeah, it's A. And yeah, let's move on.
Uh, what what does what does div mean? Like, is it divisor?
Div is
Div is
go ahead.
basically a container, which basically holds like different segments of your HTML code. Since proper HTML etiquette would be making sure whatever content you have is divided among different containers, not having everything all in one area. That way, suppose like you want to keep something visible, you can have that div set to true. That way, the user can see whatever's in the content of it. Whereas if you wanted some content to be hidden for some feature, then you'd be able to do div is set to false. That way, that content can be hidden from the user.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you see on the div hidden equals true, that means it wouldn't actually show up at all. So that's why E is also correct. So that means the whole thing is hidden. B is not correct because hello is not, or no, the world is not in the anchor. So if you see world is actually outside, so that wouldn't actually link anywhere if you click on world only. Okay, let's move on.
Looking at some common tags like the image tag mentioned earlier, you have an example here of the Schulig Ignite logo where they use the image element with the source, and the source is basically the image itself, uh, which is going to produce this image. Uh, in typical fashion, when you do set up an image component on your HTML code, what you would want to do is have the source and a thing called an alt, which essentially allows you to have some additional text in case the image doesn't load. That way, the user would know at least what was supposed to be there. Another tag is lists. In general, lists are useful to describe like any like content that you want to describe. Should it be in bullet point form, or if you want to give an ordered the detail of how things should be done step by step. So you have either the OL element or the UL, which define either a unordered list or a ordered list. and the li component is nested inside of it, where each li represents each item essentially. So as you can see here, we have a OL and LI being used, and it's going to produce number one, element one, number two, element two. So the one and two are always going to be automatically generated. You don't have to define it within the ordered list. It auto sets the components on from chronological order from top to bottom. Looking at unordered list, on the other hand, like I said earlier, you'll have bullet point form mentioned. Again, the li component remains the same, element one and element two. This will remain unchanged between the ordered list and unordered list. And then going back to the div is essentially a container which can help group multiple elements together, and it helps define sections of a content. So as you saw in the top question earlier where it mentioned div, all that really did was keep all that content together in one place. Comments are a very useful component in HTML code, as it allows for user documentation, and it helps other users who have not seen the code better understand how your code is supposed to operate and what each component does. Again, these comments aren't actually going to show up on your web browser. It'll only be in the HTML code. There are advanced tags as well. There are forms, inputs, and labels that you can create. There are tables as well. And then there's format type of tags where you have EM, strong, and other such. You have details and summary tags as well. Like the HTML template, again, what we mentioned earlier, when you can declare an HTML document with the exclamation mark and the snippet abbreviation pops up, it'll automatically generate the HTML code for you. Essentially, everything must be contained inside of the HTML tags that are made. The head tag will contain information relevant to the HTML code that you've made and whatever the web browser needs to know. And the body tag is where the primary content of the web page will show up. So again, as you can see, this was the example I showed earlier with the HTML document type of HTML. Helps the code understand it's an HTML document. All of the code is encompassed within the HTML tag. Head tag and body tag are separate from one another, with the head tag containing general information that's not required for the user to see, and then the body will contain content that you would like the user to see. So here's an example of it. There's two ways of doing this, either with the HTML5 or HTML:5 or the exclamation mark. I just did exclamation mark since it's like quicker to do. But yeah, I don't think we have to worry too much about this exercise. Again, I already showed it earlier. It's pretty standard to create an HTML file such as this. Now onto the basics of CSS. So what we earlier defined were the simple tags in HTML, which just give the basic foundation of a web browser. Now that we want to make the web browser look a bit more fancy, more, I guess, eye-catching, you would want to add some CSS to make it look different and unique. In this case, we can see earlier what you would have seen is black text saying this is a block of text. Here you can see it's blue because the CSS component blue has been applied. This image can be resized to whatever size it needs besides the default size. And then there's three different ways of implementing CSS. There's the inline, there's style tags, and there's separate files. Inline is fairly straightforward, where in each element you can incorporate a style equals and then whatever CSS you want to add into it. In this example down here, we have the element h1, with style equals to color is set to red. And then we have the semicolon here. And then we have font size set to 24 pixels, which resulted in this size of text and color in text. The style tag is different where you have a style tag set up, and then inside of it, you declare all of the CSS components that you want that will be applied into the body section of your HTML code. In this example here, we have an H1 where the color is set to red. And in order to add in external CSS files in the head tag mentioned earlier, you create a link rel style sheet and href with your CSS file, whatever it may be called. So if we look over here in the code example, you can see that in my HTML code, in the head tag, I added in a link rel style sheet, and the link to that was a example underscore one.css up here. If we scroll down here, we can see some implementation of CSS being applied. So if I go to here, we can see that we have a p tag with the style set with color being red and font size being 24 pixels. This is associates to this text being shown here. And then we also have the specific, I guess, identifier for each of the tags that are made. That way, if we want different types of CSS styles added to each of the tags, it can be done easily. If we look at here, currently in the style tag here, we have H1. This H1 will indicate that every other H1 tag that you use in the body of your HTML code, the color will always be white, regardless of anything. If you don't add anything to it, by default, it will be white if you implement this code here. Looking at it by class, class is one type of identifier where here we've set style and it's indicated by this dot right here. So as you can see, we have H1 and P tags being used. Both of them have the same class, text red, which is this CSS component here, dot text red. And then here we specified the color to be red. And then this text would be red and this text would also be red. And yes, you can see that each element can have more than one class in it here. This one is by ID, another type of identifier. And typically when you give an ID, there's one ID per page. Like here we have the element text1 shown with a hashtag. And so what happens is that this CSS component implemented here on the H1 tag has ID equals to text1, and then the text will be red. You can also nest elements in CSS. That way, suppose you have a div
Sorry,
here.
what's your question, Salt?
Yeah, I have a question for the CSS file.
Yes.
Where would you put your name of your file?
The name of the file in the HTML code.
No, there's one thing that says link real equals style sheet,
Mhm.
href equals dot file CSS. Is
Right.
um
Oh, the CSS file will be in the same directory as your HTML code level wise. So if I look here, I have this session one and I have two CS files here. One's the CSS and one's the HTML. Your href will be by default accessing the example underscore one CSS because I created this CSS file here. And this
okay.
file name is going to be anything that you want. Whatever you want to call it, as long as you're actually implementing it from the actual directory level.
Okay, thank you.
Uh, right. Looking at the nested, suppose you want to get the p tag within a div for it to be black versus like a p tag that's not inside of a div, then what you can do is have the p tag, set it up like this. That way, every paragraph tag within a div component will be black by default. And then uh, that would be like the descendant level of it. And here you can do the specific element where it's such as the first layer of a paragraph tags inside of all the divs. So that would be the first level of paragraphs. Nothing else below after that would be implemented. One other note to add is that when you're adding CSS to your tag or elements, there's different levels of specificity applied onto them. So the strongest level of CSS would be your inline. That way, whatever's mentioned here is going to overwrite any other CSS component you try to apply here, class, ID, or even the elements level. The next one would be the ID. So, uh, like as you see here, we have ID and we have class. We have H2 text, which is essentially set down here as green. But then we also have H1 text, which is blue. And since this says header 3 is in purple, we also have this element level, which is purple. However, the main one that showed up here in question mark was the uh right here in green, the ID one, which was green. If we look at here, the class one was blue, not the element level. And the in condition where it was just the element, header 3 in purple, the header 3 was in purple. For this example down here, header 5 in brown, although there's no CSS here push saying it's brown, we are incorporating an external CSS file where we've set up that all H5 elements will be in text brown, which is applied right here. And so, quick question, how could we make all this text here red?
So the correct answer is B. As you can see, if you see the CSS font dash color is not highlighted, so that's not actually a keyword we use. We use color, which is kind of stupid because you can get confused with the background color. But B is correct because it sets dot dot text red to red, also the H1 tag. Yeah, and also the body. So all three of them sets the color to red.
Yeah. Uh, and in the case you forget the CSS required for applying to text or anything, you can let VS Code help you with it as it'll provide a list of like different types of CSS that you can apply onto a tag, and then there's also a bit of a descriptor mentioning what you can do. This example here just showed with color, setting up the body. It was trying to do font color, but it doesn't exist. So then they type in color, it does exist. Then there's some default colors that are set up. However, by clicking on it or changing the to hex value, you can easily manipulate what type of color scale you want. So the editor can is really helpful in terms of applying what type of CSS should be put in. So here's another example here from what we saw earlier. Before it was just black and white text with basic default text without any CSS applied. Now we have CSS applied here, such as having a black background with white text. Our links are now green instead of the default blue. So new exercise, we'll give you about 10 minutes or so to modify your HTML website, add some CSS, anything you want to it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, just unmute or you can type in the chat.
To make a background a very specific color, you could set the background color, I believe, property, and then it should just by default set it to the color that you want. Let me see over here how we can apply such a style. If I do body, we try background color, the top here, and I set it to say black. I save it and come here and see the entirety of the text is now, or background has become black. There's some text you can't see since some of that CSS hasn't been applied, but yeah.
Yeah, also I just want to say if you are uh like if you don't know how to do a CSS property, make sure to just search it up because you can't remember every single thing. CSS is like massive. So yeah, I will suggest looking up on Google.
So yeah, looking at the code here, I added a body uh element here, set the background color to black here. If I change it to like say, could be anything here. Let's try it, I guess. Light blue. Then I save it, updates the background color.
Okay, I'm gonna close the rooms.
Okay. The difference between body and H1. So H1 is a header tag, typically applied to text, whereas the body tag is supposed to encompass like all your content. So your H1 tags, P tags, anchor tags, the div sections, all of it. Like if we look it up here and apply this. The default skeleton of HTML includes the head and the body, where in the body is where you add in all of your components. Like it says here, even in the VS Code, the body elements represent the content of the document. Peter, are all the breakout rooms closed?
Yeah, everyone's back in.
All right. So looking at the different type of styles, we can see that we can apply even more CSS elements to each uh element, I guess. So we have like the height of the element and width of the element that can be modified. If you want, you could even center your text. You can move your text all over the page depending on whatever values you set up. There's some standard unit measurements that to become familiar with, as they'll be helpful when you're setting up your pages. There's the VH, which stands for the vertical height, and helps with the viewport height. So whatever value you set is going to be relative to whatever the height of your screen is. With VW is the vertical width. Same properties as VH, where the width is going to be based on how large your viewport width size is, and it'll do it based on a specific like percentage on it. Percentage is used to set like a percent of the width of your parent element typically. Uh, EM is used to scale something relative to its default size. So suppose like you have an image which has a default size, you use EM to scale it relative to it versus like forcefully applying a scale. The common one that you will see is PX, which is just the size in pixels. This one is always going to be hard coded essentially to your text, meaning like it can't be modified, it won't change in size. It'll always remain that font size, regardless of how big your screens are. And CH is basically sizing based on the number of characters. So they're going to be dependent or like size based on the 0 character font by default. And on the slides, if you want to find out more, you could click here. So looking at this example, what we have here is a container div set where we've set the height to 100 viewport height. So it takes up the entire viewport from the top to bottom. Background color is black, as you can see, and the color is set to white here. Then we have the text align center, which essentially allows for the text here to be aligned in the center instead of by the default to the left side. And again, your text align could be anything based on whatever VS Code options provide. It could be left, center, or right. Then we have here the H1 tag. We have a link here. This hashtag essentially means the link doesn't do anything. It's kind of garbage. It's just kind of a stand-in without having it to actually take you directly somewhere. And then again, as you can see, because world isn't encompassed within the H or the anchor tag here, only hello is going to be a link while world remains as is. The next thing to look at is spacing. Essentially, the spacing of an element can change on how you want it to be set. There's three components to care about: the margin, the border, and the padding, and the default element size. So the margin is essentially going to be a spacing between the browser itself, whereas the padding is going to be the element's contents, space within the element itself, if that kind of makes sense. Like, suppose you have some text inside of a box and you increase the padding, the text inside of the box are going to shift, but the box is still going to remain where it is. And if you manipulate the margin, then the box itself will shift away from wherever the whatever size your web browser is. So like here is an example. We have a container set to black. The width and the height are set by 25 pixels. The padding from top and the left are 5 pixels, and the bottom and right are also 5 pixels. So in this case, what we see is that we'll have some spacing in between from here and in here. And so what happens is that when you add up the entire dimension itself, because the thing itself is 25 pixels, but because you added this 5 additional pixels on all sides, the entirety of it will be 30 pixels. Like this box alone would be 30 pixels. Had there been a margin set, then there'd be the spacing from the outside of it. And yeah, here you can see with the margin component, they added some margins here. Although you can't see it here, you can see that the black portion of it is 30 by 30, but the entire space is 35 by 35, which would be encompassing this additional space over here. The border is a very nice thing to add for your images and text as well, where you can design how you want the borders to look like. The default would always be 0 with your square box. You can add a 5%, and then all sides would have a 5% border radius applied to them. Here you have a border radius of 5% and 15%. So you have two corners which are set to 5%, but then you have two others which are set to 15. And then here's an example of a default, or less, I guess a profile picture image that you typically see where the border radius is set to 50%. So it's just a circle. Uh, Designing from scratch. So when you want to make CSS, it is quite hard to do it from scratch. So there are different practices that you can do with CSS to make things look good. Working your way inward, you start typically from the outside, the very most outer component of your HTML code, and then work your way in. That way, you know exactly how your information is supposed to be displayed on your web browser, how the text should look like, where should it be located, all that kind of stuff. As working from inside and out could potentially cause like issues to occur. Suppose should a mistake occur, then you would have to go back in and adjust it. So always start from the outer section and then work your way in. So the main content section, as we mentioned previously, the body component, this is where the content goes. And again, here when we have a div, this is where the content goes again. Within your HTML, in the body, you can have like as many div components you want. It doesn't matter. However, you would always need one body in the HTML and only one. So when you're deciding to set up your content, there's things to consider: content width, the font settings, the color scheme, and how you can style individual elements, the images, code, text, whatnot. Uh, the content width is typically set to auto, where people think like they're using 100%, but it's always set to whatever is required. So the only issue is that whenever you have a width kind of set, you want to make sure that you design it in a manner that could potentially work on all monitors or screens, since each screen's size is different. Again, if you have a default one set, then it's going to cause that text to look the same across every screen. So On the smaller screens, it might look nice, but on like a larger screen, it might be too small. So then again, that's when you want to try to manipulate it a bit so it looks right. So you have different examples here. You have the full bleed, you have a mix, and you have padded. So these are like some website displays that you can see of how they implemented the text. Uh, the font settings you have to consider about, such as the design. Usually, like as you can see here, you have a really fancy looking type of text header applied here. You have the generic one here, and then you have a different type also applied here. You can see that here much more CSS is applied here, changing the color and whatnot to make it different from the other two. And then the basic fonts that you have is that you have your color. Color of the text would be changed based on your hex, which is with the hashtag RGBA. Basically, they're on a scale from 0 to 225, I believe, with red, blue, and green. And then you can have the name as needed. Text align, said earlier, would be left, center, and right. And then line height is based on each line of content and how far it should be separated from one another. And then the font size adjusts the text size essentially that you see in like your Word document, Google Docs. And the font family, again, you can change like the way your font looks. Some rule that you can apply to is use like import fonts that are like made by other people. You can find different websites and see how they're made. Or alternatively, VS Code has some default fonts applied where you can choose whichever one you want to use, and if it seems appealing, you can implement it. And again, if you want to find more about this, you can click on this link here. Referring back to the line height, as you can see, you need to know what level or what line height to use because in this condition here, we have all the text. It's too cramped. You can't read anything. And obviously, it doesn't look good. Here, it's a better improvement, but again, it can be improved even further. And then you have this here where the spacing is much better. It's much more legible. You can read it properly. Nothing's too cluttered or anything like that. And so 1.6 is typically a good choice to use. So here we have line height. Smaller text might need more line height compared to the others. Like you can see here on the Schulich Ignite website, we have updates to the Schulich Ignite blog, but we have some text here that is kind of interfering with this text here. And then here they've updated it so that it's properly displayed. And there's some other tools you can use here, the visualizer and advanced visualizer. You can click on these links to see furthermore what they provide with. Uh, some suggestions to apply. Typically, when you're dealing with header tags, you would want to keep them uh, the same color essentially. Especially if you have specific headers, try keeping them the same. Like all your H1s have the same color. Have all your H2s be the same color. Having them different could be a bit confusing to the user, especially if like the color is an indicator for something important. Line height as well you have to consider. If it's too cramped or too far, it's not going to look uh, appealing to read. It might be more difficult to read. So make sure you apply a good line height. Typically, the default line height is acceptable, but sometimes if you need a custom line height, then you have to implement a custom line height. Font size. Often you do not need to change this. However, in some cases, if you absolutely need to, then make sure you know what type of font size you're going to be using and see if it looks right. And then the font family, typically you can use the sans serif for most elements. However, you are allowed to change the font family to whatever you need, as long as it's like illegible and looks nice to read. So like we have an example here. We have the font family set to sans serif. We have the line height set to the 1.6. Margin is set to 0 and auto, which just means no like margins have been primarily applied. And then the max width is of 90 characters. So that would be like the zeros across here, since that's the reference point made. And then here, what we've done is apply every single H header tag with the same CSS components. So instead of like doing H1, then this, then H2, then this code, then H3, and so on, what you can easily do is if you want multiple tags or elements to reuse the same type of CSS style, you can just set it up in this by separating them with commas. So now we have a new exercise here. Try updating your website with the new things we've applied or discussed about, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, just type in the chat or a mute. I think we're gonna let everyone back in.
All right. So when we're trying to choose a color, this is more related to the CSS side. We need to know like what type of like combination of colors will work the best together. That way, whoever's reading your web page like isn't bothered or uncomfortable by trying to read it or like is having difficulty reading it. Like uh here we have the default web page here. However, by applying some CSS, one condition or one method that they applied was doing yellow and red text. Here it was gray and black text. Again, both of these are like a little bit hard on the eyes to read. This one's a bit too bright and a bit too vibrant to read, whereas this one might be a bit too dark to read. Uh, we need to know like the different types of contrast that need to be made between the light and darkness. So here's an example right here. Trying to read this would be much harder compared to reading this because the contrast of this is better than what applied here. And so looking at between these two, this one you could say is pretty much like a standard dark mode type of text where the background is dark and the text is bright, whereas here the background is bright but the text is dark. This condition though isn't going to be any like easy to read at all. It's going to be harder to read. Uh, to know if we have proper contrast, again, you could look at the exemplars provided here on the link here, as well as these two links. Uh, we can look at the example that I've made here. Here it's light blue, which isn't the best to look at. Down here, we can go and modify this value. So suppose we go for something a bit like gray, for example. We can see how that looks. So again, it depends because I have different colors here for examples, but you can see that like having like a proper darker background as opposed to like a really bright background can make the difference in how a person can read the text or use your website. Dark does not equal black. So as you can see here, like with the VS Code that you have, it isn't completely black. It's just dark. Dark enough so that way we can at least differentiate like the text and everything properly and it looks appealing. Whereas if it was like pitch black, then it would be like a little bit difficult to read or be a little bit strange on the eyes. I believe there is some like settings in Windows where you can try applying like purely black and you can see there's a big difference between the default setting they've applied and like the custom that you add. Uh, like it says here, don't burn people's eyes out. Like both of these are prime examples of what you should not do because again, this pink and green combo is a bit too flashy, same as this red and yellow, too flashy. Uh, the only situation that these could like ever possibly work is if you applied even more CSS that can like kind of cover up like the flashiness of whatever's being shown on screen right now. And one last thing, uh, if you do get a weird space when setting a background that doesn't have the same color, it's because you're gonna need to add the background to the HTML element. So like in this case, they've set the background here one color in HTML, whereas the content for the body is used over here. And if there's some spacing, like it'll be evident how that CSS is applied. Looking at individual elements, like you could try testing out your CSS on like every element tag that you made, see what's applicable and what's possible. You can for the borders, the radius, the color, the shape. You can add shadows, the background, color in the image size. Z index is one thing to be considered about as it basically dictates what level your content is on the web page. So suppose you have like a body on Z index 1 and yet another body on Z index 0. And suppose the two bodies were to overlap one another by like forcefully changing the positioning. The Z index or the body with index 1 will overlap the body with Z index 0. So sometimes it's useful to see if you want to blend like background images with your body paragraphs and whatnot together. And yeah, typically the Z index is going to be the default set to 0, which is the same for all of them. However, if you want to like specify it directly, should you need to, then you can indicate it by Z index and then number. Number wise, you could do any value. You just have to make sure that when you do set a Z index, like your range isn't like too far off from the other ones. Like have a relative scale of how you want the content to be displayed from one another. Here we have the cascade and precedence. This essentially discusses about what type of CSS level you want to implement, such as in the inner HTML, it will have many CSS effects cascaded to the inner HTML elements. Uh, Although it's not always the case, it is usually, but you could check here with this link and see more about it. And here's an important thing to look at. What happens is that, like I would mention earlier, with how the way the CSS is applied, it's inline, then you have your style tags and then the files. And so again, in the CS code I applied here, I mentioned the specificity level is based on inline, then you have your ID, your class, and the elements level. And then the next level after this would be your external files, such as this one being applied. Here are some resources that you can use to see, as there's been like a lot of CSS that's being applied everywhere. You can look at the Schulich Ignite website, for example. It has a lot of CSS applied there. Any website really, Apple website you can look at, any website really at all. It has a lot of CSS, and there's some examples that they'll show you what they did and possibly how they implemented it. Next week we'll be talking about like the different CSS frameworks. That way it'll be easier to implement the CSS without having to do all of it raw uh, by scratch, essentially. So realistically, when you're looking at web pages, stealing like a developer, you could just look at any website you want and see how they implemented some sort of a feature, and then see how you could try implementing a version of your own on your website. Uh, Essentially, you'll find out something that might be easy to implement, and then you can try adding it to yours. It might be useful. Dev tools essentially is the one thing that you see on your web browser. Typically, when you go press inspect element, and then you see a whole lot of text that pops up, that information essentially describes components of the web page. Typically, you'll be seeing the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. However, there's other sections that you can look at, such as networking, or the network traffic, performance, and what other type of data is being sent. If we look over here, in order to activate this, you could right click and press inspect and check. Then you can see all this text pops up. Again, you can see you have the padding here that mentions the size, if any padding is applied, and it'll show here. Let's try hovering over some text. See, by hovering over some text, you can see what section they're looking at, the web browser is analyzing. And so some of these have a default padding set or default margin set, such as this here. I have no specific margin set, but the content is of this size, margin is of 16 pixels. And through each of these, you can see any of these. Some of them you have to click on and see this div, for example. Each of these, all of them have some descriptors mentioning about it. So this is under the elements. If you want to look at the network, there's a network section here, but you won't have to worry about this too much. Mainly for the web page designing and everything, it'd be the HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript that you see here. That was by accessing it by inspect element. The alternative way would be doing F12, which should also allow you to just directly access it like that.
You can also do Control Shift I.
Or that as well. Yeah. So yeah, inspect element was the first way. Just mentioned it right here. You can right click and check that. Element styles, again, you can see here. There's another section that you could have seen that showed like the CSS directly applied and what is being shown by the browser. So here it'll show you the segment and here it'll allow you to see the style. As you can see here, if you can, it says styles and other components here as well, but you would care about the styles importantly to see how like what type of style is being implemented on the browser. As it is possible that if you want to implement the style but it's not showing up on the browser, you can then check through the dev tools to see what actually is being implemented, and then from there try debugging and figuring out where the issue is occurring. Here you can try modifying it in the browser directly to see what it could look like. So suppose you're like testing out, seeing what things you can make, you could directly make the changes here, apply it and see. However, it won't save, it's just to see what it'll look like. And if you do export the changes, you could do it directly as this, saving it all, and then you can see what changes have been made. That way, if you do want to see what was made before, you can without losing it. And here it also says you could do this, however, don't become too reliant on doing it for all your coding in the browser, because it could potentially cause issues to occur when trying to load the files, especially behind a private server. So typically what you want to do is test them out, but make the changes directly in your code. And you can definitely do much, much more with HTML than what we've talked about today, because today's stuff was pretty much the fundamental aspect of HTML. However, later on, we'll see how we can incorporate the HTML like concept into other things. To wrap up, we can look at how this HTML and CSS are used on a website. We've seen HTML basic elements and properties that can be applied, and with CSS, we learned that we can use CSS to make those basic properties into something much more unique to the web page and fancier. The end of session exercise, you could see it on the GitHub mention provided where you can see what the session or what the exercise is. There's going to be, I believe, 3 levels that you can complete: a level 1, 2, and 3, with 3 being the highest level. And as I said, you can complete through each level whatever you would like, and you'll get your points accordingly to it. Here's some examples of what they might be asking. Here is an image of like the of a basic website talking about pelicans in Calgary. Another one here is cross-site scripting, showing how code is displayed and reflected with the text here versus like code text here. To submit their exercises, you can submit it onto the Google Docs form here. It'll be on the slide link as well. You could click on it. And to track your points, you could click here as well.
Yeah. I just want to say the uh, end of session exercises are optional, but if you do them, you will get more Ignite points and a higher tier of certificate. But if you,
Also, it'll
yeah,
allow you to gain like more experience if you
yeah,
do the exercises.
yeah.
There's still about 10 minutes remaining, so if you want to stay, you can stay. If you have any other questions, or start on the exercise if you wish. Uh, you only need to submit the session exercises. Any exercises you did in class is just purely for practice. It just helps you out. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Where do we submit this?
It will be, I think it's on the website. So
On the
if you go,
website and on the slides, if you do have access to them, there's a slide towards the very bottom where it mentions the form where you can submit your exercise.
Okay, I found it.
Yeah.
And do we get points per exercise, or if we just do number three, do we get all the points, or is that do one, two, and three?
You
yes,
get essentially like all the points associated for level three. You would get like if you do level one, you only get the points for level one. If you do level two, you get the points for level two, and then level three is the same thing.
Uh,
Yeah.
okay. And what was the there's different certificates you can get at the end.
yes. So if you participate in the sessions plus you do the assignments, you will get a higher tier than the people who don't do the assignments.
Like 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 you have to do you have to do 100% all the assignments to get the higher tier, or
Uh, that is a good question. I will bring it to the team, but I think as long as you do most of the assignments and you give try your best, I think you'll get the certificate.
okay.
Question in chat. It says, "What if you do all the levels?" I think that each of the levels are kind of dependent on each other. So level two, will like require you to know a lot of the content for level one, and level three would be you having to know or implementing all of the content from level two and one. I think. I don't know if it's true. Is it?
Um, yeah, so level two is just like a harder version of level one, and then level three is a harder version of level two. So if you want to do all three of them, go ahead. But if you do level three, you're already doing level one and two.
Yeah.
Do you know how many points you get for each assignment?
Yes. Um, Pretty sure it's level one 15, level two is 25, and then level three is 35.
Thank you for teaching. Have a good day.
You're
Yep, no
welcome. Have a good
problem.
day. Uh, Regarding the level, they aren't prerequisites of each other. Like you can go directly straight to level three if you want and try attempting it. If you find it difficult, however, then you could do level two and so forth. But yeah, there's no prerequisites or anything for each of these. You can start off whichever level you would like. Since it's just basically like the content covered, but increasing in difficulty, that's it. Like suppose level one has 5 points, level two has 10, and level three has 15. If you do level three right away, then you just get the 15 points. But there is no need to do level two and one since those are already incorporated into level three. Um, if you do all the levels, you get more points.
No,
Peter,
no, you
no?
don't. No, you
Okay,
don't.
no, you don't.
Yeah, you just get the highest level. So if you do one and two, you get two.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna stop recording.